Welcome to the Wired for Success podcast, your show for ambitious, mission-driven entrepreneurs who want to build million-dollar businesses without sacrificing their health, relationships, or happiness, who understand that in order to build their empire, they need a solid foundation, and that the more they are thriving, the more their business is thriving too. This show brings you the very best from science, self-development, and entrepreneurship to set you up for sustainable success. Hi, I'm Claudia Garbutt, the scientist turned mindset and high performance coach for entrepreneurs, and I help you get wired for success. Hey everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Wired for Success podcast, where we talk about all things science, self-development, and entrepreneurship that help you get to that next level of success in your life and business. My guest today is rebel scientist Dr. Sarah Turner. Sarah has a postgraduate degree in Clinical Neuroscience, a bachelor's degree in Psychological Sciences and Nutritional Medicine. And Sarah spent the first 10 years of her career as a research scientist in the pharmaceutical industry, planning and executing experiments looking at the effects of electrostatics on physiology. And whilst she was in California, Sarah became involved with the biohacking movement and has interviewed some of the most prolific thought leaders, visionaries, and experts in that field. Her main interest right now is photobiomodulation, that is using specific light wavelengths and pulse frequencies to heal the body and promote optimal functioning with a focus on brain issues. Sarah also co-hosts the weekly biohacking podcast, Rebel Scientist, where she and her co-host Russ interview a variety of cutting-edge health experts with a focus on wellness, longevity, and health optimization. And Sarah was also a speaker at the Global Summit on Habit Change and High Performance Habits that I hosted back in January. And it's my pleasure to welcome her back. So welcome, Sarah, and thank you so much for being on my show today.
Oh, thank you, Claudia. It's really great to be here.
I'm looking forward to this. So, Sarah, do you remember what made you first fall in love with science in general? Did you have any key experiences at school or somewhere that made you decide, this is what I want to do with my life?
I don't know about key experiences. I have always been interested in how things work, particularly the body. I mean, to me, like the body and really just nature generally is totally fascinating. You know, I don't know why anybody needs to kind of look outside just the body that we're in to kind of find that interest. I also think as a very young age, I mean, my dad used to read Sherlock Holmes stories to me a lot of the time, and that's all about kind of investigating and find out what's going on and kind of that logical mindset. So maybe that rubbed off on me a little bit. But certainly my subjects in school were always biology focused, and that's something that I've carried on. So really, I suppose from my school days, my focus has always been biology in particular. And I kind of aspired to that, you know, that mad scientist, you know, test tubes and all things kind of smoke coming out. I think that's really where my head was at when I was kind of planning that career path.
And what makes you the rebel scientist? What are you doing that's so rebellious?
So yeah, the rebel scientist was born actually out of lockdown, but and I needed like an outlet. And a lot of what I talk about actually goes against orthodox science, and so hence the rebel scientist, because my training was very orthodox. You know, I've got university degrees, and then I went on to be a research scientist in the pharmaceutical industry. And I very quickly kind of sussed out the limitations to a purely pharmaceutical approach. I'm not going to be big pharma bashing or anything. And actually, I think there is a place for all kinds of science. But I think we do need to think a little bit broader when we're thinking about health and biology than the current paradigm that we're in. Certainly, I think the biology that we're using right now is a little bit limited. And if you look at what's going on in the fringes with things like quantum biology, you know, quantum physics being brought into biology, and people looking at more kind of ancient and traditional healing methods and then trying to find ways that we can bring them into our current paradigm, and looking at how we maybe are missing something by completely, you know, moving on to the new thing and discounting the old. I think that's really the rebel scientist part, where I'm kind of saying, no, you really need to right now to be your own scientist and to kind of take in all the information and sort it out and make your own decisions. and some of it will go against the mainstream. You know, I'm very much for what, I don't know, it used to be called fringe health or alternative health. You know, I think biohacking almost comes a little bit into that alternative health category. It's not always orthodox mainstream science that's being used in a lot of what's going on at the cutting edge and the frontier of medicine and health.
Yeah, I agree. And I really like that holistic approach and just bringing different areas together to create something that's more than the sum of the parts.
That's right.
Now, what do you find hardest about translating your research into a business? What are the similarities between, say, science and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, well, I would just say, for full transparency, I never set out to be an entrepreneur or to start a business. You know, really, I'm a scientist at heart, and that was my focus. You know, and I really got very passionate about the science that I'm involved in, which is photobiomodulation. Just that's a long word for light therapy, or using light to modulate your biology. But I really got excited about that when I first learned it, because again, this is something I wasn't taught in school. You know, I've got, 3+ biology degrees, and nobody taught me about how light interacts with the body. You know, such a fundamentally important thing, being we're diurnal mammals that live under the sun.
Yeah.
And so then, I became very passionate about it, and I started going out and doing my own research and volunteering with people who were doing studies so that I could see for myself. And during this time, I volunteered on a study which was actually looking at Parkinson's disease and whether you could influence Parkinson's disease using just light therapy. And this was a study that was carried out at the Quiet Mind Foundation, Dr. Marvin Berman, in conjunction with Baylor Scott and White in Texas. And we were using a helmet, this big kind of clunky, heavy helmet that was used for research purposes, but it had an effect. And actually, that's now published data that people can go and look up. But actually collecting the data myself, I could see it had an effect. It was double blind. We had a sham and we had an active, but it was very apparent, later on in the study who was on the active, because they were getting better. And really, I thought, I want to have this device. I want to bring this out, but there wasn't one that was usable and friendly. And I also wanted to incorporate systemic therapy, like, could you actually maximize the effect by using devices put in other places rather than the head? So really, I set up the company just because I wanted the device. Really, I wanted to see that device. I wanted to be able to use it, and I wanted to experiment with it. So the device needed to be created. So really, that's how I'm now the CEO of CeraThrive. And I have to say, I have a lot of help from my backers and the people who are making the device, like Tree Ventures, that, I'm kind of out there in front as a spokesperson, but a lot of the technical part and the actual running the business part is coming from that side. But yes, it's interesting that sometimes in science, if there's something that there's not out there you can use, you have to go ahead and make it yourself. And that's really how I became on the business side. I became like having to do a very quick crash course into being a businesswoman, which I have to say, I'm not a master by any stretch, but that was the trajectory to get there.
Yeah, that totally resonates with me. I'm a very reluctant entrepreneur myself.
Yes.
Wow. It's a completely different world out there. It's nothing that has anything even remotely to do with what I learned at school or at university. So it's kind of like failing forward.
That's right. Yeah, you just have to very rapidly learn these skills that you didn't know that you needed in the first place. So yeah. Kudos to you for doing it, because now you're doing it at a level where you can coach people. But that's pretty amazing, because it is a whole different skill set that you need to do that.
It is, but I think it kind of helps being a scientist, because you approach problems in a certain way. Like, you have your hypotheses, and then you devise a strategy, you test your strategy, you tweak your strategy. So it's kind of like problem solving, but just in a different context. So I feel it might be easier for someone with a science background.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's just learning the terminology, isn't it? I mean, that's like another language when you've kind of, people start talking to you in all of these like A series, C series, seeding and all that. And you're like, what are you talking about? But once you get used to the language, you're right. It is just a case of, okay, this is the problem. How do we solve it? What do you need to bring in to make various things happen? Yeah, I think you're right there.
Now, can you maybe describe a time where you faced a significant challenge or setback, maybe when you started out with the new business, and share how you overcame that obstacle? Just like, what were your thoughts? What was your process to overcome that?
Goodness, I think there's been a lot of challenges. I mean, we've all got a collective challenge that we all faced a few years ago with COVID and the lockdowns. Yeah. And of course, that was a huge challenge for everyone in many ways. And it was a challenge for me, one, in all of a sudden being grounded, that was a big challenge for me. I'm not someone who's used to being in one place, but also, of course, business, became very difficult, especially, trading with Asia or doing different things. And I don't know actually whether I did tackle it with any grace. I had a lot of stomping around, a kind of a lot of having to find patience. But, I'd like to say, that I was able to be very zen and I developed patience, but I didn't. I kind of came kicking and screaming through that, but it was an enforced patience. And actually now looking back, I can see, it is just a case of keeping going, every day, getting up, going on your computer, doing what you can do to move things along. And some days nothing was going on, you were waiting on someone who couldn't do something, and your manufacturer couldn't do anything. So I think that was a big challenge that we've all had to face. And now the challenge is the other way around. It's trying to keep up with the world that's speeding up again. So now all of a sudden we have our freedom, manufacturing's all kicking off, things are happening, events are starting. So now it's trying to match the pace of everything catching up. And that's becoming a big challenge, trying to get things done fast enough now because everybody's back on board. So it's trying to juggle everything. And again, like you say, it's project management. How do you prioritize what needs to be done? Where are the bottlenecks? And I think that's become the thing that I focus on the most now, is kind of reviewing what needs to be done and seeing where potentially can that hold other people up from what they're doing. Try and get that piece done first so that you kind of free up that, the chain of work that needs to happen. And sometimes it's not the fun part, sometimes it's not the bit, it's not the part that you want to do because, I'm here, I'm almost got my product. I've been in China. It's great. I want to focus on getting the programs in the device because really that's my intention for this whole thing, is to have a really good device. But there are things that need to happen on the business side to make sure that goes smoothly. And so, having the kind of mental fortitude to get that bit done before you can do the bits you like. Again, that's a big challenge for me and something that I'm trying to focus on, certainly for this next few months.
Yeah, that certainly is a challenge, at least until you can hire out all the things that are not in your area of genius. And you can just be like, I don't like to do it. Please, you do it. Let me focus on my things that I want to do.
Yes,
now,
that would be lovely.
What else did you learn from that experience? Has it somehow changed how you approach problem solving, or has it changed your mindset in general when you look back?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed my mindset in general because coming from just purely, working on the science side or I mean, part of my role actually since leaving the pharmaceutical industry, I have done a lot of coaching. I have done nutrition. I have done, what's really marketing. I call it like science communication, movies and things like that. But now moving to a business side, you do have to become a little bit harder. And actually, I got a business coach because I didn't know what I was doing. And I actually found it interesting that the business coach is trying to, when they're coaching you in business, they're actually getting you to think in like a very linear way. And it kind of came into my mind that it's kind of a very masculine way to be thinking,
Yeah.
And so you really have to dig into your masculine side. And I know that's a little bit controversial because we kind of live in a time where, we need to talk about equality and how women entrepreneurs are just the same as men entrepreneurs. But I actually found out that I was questioning a little bit of it, because I did have to get a little bit more masculine in the way I do everything, one thing after another. And, I know we can't it's not stereotypical behavior, but that was something that was very interesting to me, is the kind of, when you get coached in leadership, it's a very specific kind of leadership coaching that I was getting. And maybe, this is not the same for everybody, but that is something where I thought, oh, I see how this goes. And actually being a little bit more aggressive, being a little bit more, in meetings where you have to, really put your point forward, that's something that I wasn't used to doing. And I found, okay, maybe I have to dig a bit deeper and actually tap into some of those more masculine behaviors in order to kind of get where I want to be. And I'm sure there'll be lots of female entrepreneurs who'll maybe ring up your show and say, no, that's not how you do it at all. But that was certainly my experience for the last couple of years.
Yeah. I think I agree with a lot of that, especially the part about confidence and being more assertive, because that's what sells. If you're not confident and if you're not assertive enough, I think people just feel that you're not sure. It feels like they can't really trust what you're putting out there. It's like, if she's not confident, I'm not going to buy.
Yes.
And sometimes it's really tough, especially as someone, like, as a scientist. I felt like I always had this belief that nothing is 100% sure, right? It's always this, we think we know, but we are never 100% sure. So to me, it always felt like I don't want to portray a certainty that's not there. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of, it's weird.
No, I understand. And I actually think that's a sign of intelligence, is that you have that room for doubt, because it gives you flexibility. It gives you there's flexibility in the system. You're kind of doing what you think is the right thing to do, but who knows, maybe new information will come in. You need to have that flexibility. If new information comes in, you need to be able to change. And if you're 100% sure, you kind of lose that flexibility. And that's, like you say, that's a good scientist. But you're right, from a business side, people want certainty. They want you to say, yes, this will, X will definitely do Y, and that's a different mindset that you have to adopt. And maybe it's about, finding a balance there. But yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying, because I also always have a little bit of room for doubt, because then, it enables you to explore possibilities.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. I think that's still a good thing, just to be able to say, okay, there is room to see things from a different perspective. I'm open to receiving new information, and I'm not so set in my own ways that I cannot adapt to new information, or that I cannot incorporate new information. Now that we know a little bit more about you, let's talk about your area of expertise. Can you explain how targeted red light therapy works and summarize its benefits for brain and gut health?
Sure. So light therapy on the whole is kind of coming into its own now. There's probably 3,000 plus peer-reviewed scientific papers on photobiomodulation, which again is just the fancy word for light therapy, on either the brain and the brain-gut connection. So, and it's growing daily, because people are really beginning to understand the potential of this therapeutic technique, because really what you're doing is, in a way, you're mimicking sunlight. You're mimicking how our bodies have evolved to be healthy when we're in certain wavelengths of light. So the sun contains all the frequencies of light, and then we're exposed to different frequencies, different wavelengths or colors at different times of the day. So at sunrise, it's predominantly red and near infrared. That's the long wavelengths of light. And that's just because of the angle of the sun and the earth, you get these longer wavelengths of light. And then in the middle of the day, you get blue and UV. And we all know that that has a biological effect, right? Because if you go out in the UV light, you get a tan, you have a direct effect on the body. And then in the evening, as the sun starts to set, we get those long wavelengths again. So people have started to look at how these particular wavelengths have an effect on the body. And what they found is the red wavelengths, the longer wavelengths, actually can penetrate quite deep into the body. And people are always quite surprised when I tell them that I'm using red light therapy on the brain, because people imagine like the brain is in the skull in this like really dark place. Mm-hmm. But actually the skull is fairly transparent to near infrared. So that's the long wavelength. That's the kind of color that's just past the red spectrum. So it's invisible, but it's kind of close to visible red light. Mm-hmm. So really, when you think about it from an evolutionary point of view, you know, we're kind of at sunrise and sunset, we're programmed to see these wavelengths. It's not a surprise that they have a biological effect. And we know about circadian rhythms, right? You know, the body is tuned into different circadian rhythms, and that goes with the sun. But I think what we're beginning to discover now that people maybe weren't so aware of is that the body is covered in light receptors. You know, it's not just the eyes. That's not the only way we get light into the body. And one of the main ways, especially for these kind of healing red wavelengths of light, they're absorbed by a very specific organelle inside the cell, which is the mitochondria, which, you know, I'm sure it's kind of ringing something from their school biology, but the mitochondria are just like organelles inside the cell that sometimes it's called the powerhouse or the battery of the cell. Yeah, the powerhouse.
The powerhouse.
Because that's where you make the energy molecule ATP. So the red and infrared wavelengths of light are absorbed by the mitochondria, and the effect is more energy in the form of ATP and a release of nitric oxide, reactive oxygen species, quite a few other things going on. But from a very, very basic point of view, your body gets a lot more energy and your body uses that for healing. So it's such an amazing It's such an amazing thing to think that you can get your body to heal itself simply by putting light on it of a certain wavelength.
That's so cool.
It's so cool. It's non-toxic, you know, it's non-invasive. It's something that your body's used to. It's allowing your body to heal itself. So you're kind of not directing the therapy. Your body is taking up the energy and it's going to use that energy where it needs to heal. A lot of other things go on now that in the brain, which is becoming even more fascinating. Because light also will absorb, water will also absorb light. And of course, the brain is mainly water. Our whole bodies are mainly water. We're just kind of big bags of saline water, really. And so structuring the water in the body, you know, that's being found to have this amazing effect on how the brain works and health. You know, it also, the mitochondria are similar to bacteria. So if you shine light on the gut, are you influencing the gut bacteria? Are you influencing the vagus nerve that kind of carries signals from the gut to the brain? So there's all kinds of ways that our body is responding to light in a positive way. And the outcome of that is that you can use these light therapies for a number of different treatments. But if you're healthy, you can use light to actually improve your performance, improve your memory, improve your focus, which is kind of where I'm at, because I'm always, you know, we've got one brain. How can we make our brains better so that we can do all these amazing things that we want to do for longer? You know, longevity is such a buzzword right now because everybody, you know, we're all living longer, but are we living longer with healthy brains? You know, that's where we want to be. Nobody wants to live to 100, you know, if you've got dementia at 70. What we want is to live longer, but with healthy brains, healthy guts, healthy brains.
Yeah, I think it's really scary that we live longer, but also all those neurodegenerative diseases are becoming the next pandemic. And that's a really scary thought for a lot of people, especially if you have a family history of, say, Alzheimer's, and you know there's a genetic component. So if you can use something like red light therapy to maybe counteract some of those risk factors that you otherwise can't really do much about. I mean, if it's in your genes, it's in your genes. But if you can use something like this therapy, that would be amazing, right?
That would be amazing. And, you know, the science of epigenetics, which talks about how you can influence the expression of your genes. You know, that dictates that there are lifestyle changes that you can make, which will change the expression of genes. So, you know, you could be dealt a bad hand in terms of your kind of overall genetics, but using these different techniques like light therapy and other lifestyle changes, you can totally change whether or not those particular genes are expressed. And I think that's very interesting, because, you could have some, very simple practices, seeing sunrise, seeing sunset, using red light therapies, avoiding toxic foods, and you could totally mitigate potentially against some of these illnesses later in life. It just takes a bit of forward planning, which, that's a hard sell for a lot of people. It's a hard sell. But I mean, a lot of the biohacking movement is all about that, which is another reason why I love being in that kind of group, is because people are on that trip of preventative medicine, which, yeah.
Treatment is good, but if you can prevent it, that's even better.
Even better, yeah.
So what are the specific wavelengths and dosages of red light therapy that are most effective for brain and gut health? And how can our listeners ensure that they are using the right type of therapy for their needs?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there are a lot of different red light devices out there, but really they are tailored for different applications. And as I've said, the body's fairly transparent to red and near infrared, but the more you put in front of it, like if you put bone, for example, like a cranium, you do need to have a fairly high power, and you need to have the right wavelength. So, for example, to get into the surface of the brain, you need to have a light which is over 850 nanometers. So that's in this near infrared range that I was talking about. It's invisible light, but it's a longer wavelength than red. So that's 850 nanometers. Actually, the device that I've got goes right the way up to 1070 nanometers, so that you ensure that you're covering a whole range of chromophores or light receivers, and that you're definitely kind of getting to the surface of the brain. So if you're looking for a brain device specifically, one, it needs to go on your skin. So this is why my device goes here across the forehead, because hair will reflect a lot of light. A lot of the dosages of a lot of the pancranial devices is potentially lost if you have a lot of hair. I mean, if you haven't got a lot of hair, they're great. I mean, I've seen, for people who are kind of losing their hair, or they can, even go to the stage of shaving a little bit of hair to do it, then that's fine. But if you don't want to do that, or if you have got a lot of hair, making sure that it fits flush to the skin is kind of important. Making sure it's got a high power. So normally when people talk about power with regards to light, they express it as either milliwatts per centimeter squared or joules per centimeter squared. And joules per centimeter squared takes into account a treatment time or a therapy time. So you want to look at a device which is about 30 milliwatts per centimeter squared to kind of get a good amount of photons penetrating the body. But if you're just looking for something like pain relief, or just a wellness device, there are these panels that you can stand against, and they're cool. And they normally have red light, which is about 630 or 660 nanometers. And then normally another infrared one, which is 850 nanometers usually. There are what we call optic windows. Yeah, there are specific wavelengths of light which we know are being received by the mitochondria. So you'll find most of the red lights that are available are either 630, 650, 850 nanometers.
And so how long would we use that for?
So the length of time you use it for does depend on the power output. If you have a very high output device, you probably only need it for like 1 to 5 minutes a day. If you have a slightly lower powered device, you can get the same dose by using it for 10 or 20 minutes a day. It's almost like a Goldilocks effect, if you use too little, it's not going to work. If you use too much, you're going to overdo it, because if you use too much, the body starts to work really efficiently and it generates loads of waste products, and your body can't then dispose of the waste products and you lose the effect. So it needs to be just right, but there is quite a big window for just right. You can use a fairly low power device for a longer time and get an effect. So, if you're buying like a really cheap kind of torch device from Amazon, that might not be what you need. If you've got like a really super high power medical laser, that might be overdoing it. So I think the advice would be find out what you want to use it for, try and use a device that fits flush to the body and at least curves around the body, because then you're getting the full dose of light. Because a lot of the flat panels, you lose a lot of the light because the light will only go in a straight line. And if it comes against a surface that isn't directly in front of it, it's just going to bounce off again. So, some of these devices that curve around the body, they're the best ones to have. So flexible device, around about 30 milliwatts per centimetre squared, and get it from a reputable company where they've actually posted the specifications and you can read them. And like, for example, the device that I've produced, I've also made sure that they're totally shielded from EMF, because you don't want to kind of give healing frequencies to your body and then give negative frequencies with kind of dirty electricity or putting out too much non-native EMF. So battery, I think the battery ones are best, but I'm a little bit biased, rather than ones that plug into the wall, because then you're kind of circumventing that getting any fields from your electricity. You're just getting, hopefully, a shielded battery that's providing the power.
That sounds good. So how can people integrate this red light therapy into their daily routines for optimal health and performance? When should they use it? So should they use it straight in the morning after waking up, before bed, twice a day, once a day?
Again, it really depends what your goal is, what you're trying to achieve with the light, because there's a lot of evidence now to suggest if you use red light immediately before athletic training, you actually can train harder and have less muscle soreness afterwards, because you're providing the body with a lot of oxygen up front. So from an athletic performance point of view, a lot of people use these devices prior to doing any exercise. And then, of course, you can use them immediately afterwards to kind of counteract that DOMS effect, the delayed onset muscle soreness effect. If you're using it, for example, for focus and concentration, I always recommend that people do it while they're doing a task that requires their focus and concentration, because you need to build the muscle, you need to train the muscle. And the more you combine those tasks, the more kind of your body gets used to that, and you can kind of, it's almost like hormesis, a little bit of stress does you good. You need to kind of build it up. I actually use mine just before bed, because I'm kind of using it as a relaxation. I want to have good sleep. I'm really kind of become a bit of a sleep fanatic over the last couple of years, and I track my sleep and I do all kinds of things. I think one of the main things is to not look at very bright lights just before you go to bed. So if you have got a very bright panel or something, it might be a good idea to do it a few hours before you're going to bed. But I don't think there's any hard and fast rules about when to do it. Probably just within, if possible, within sunrise and sunset, if you're going to be looking at it. But yeah, really, it's when you're doing the task that you're trying to train.
Okay, and that's interesting, because I thought that if you wanted to optimize for sleep, you would use it in the morning and in the evening, just to train the circadian rhythm and to set your biological clock, or whatever you want to call it.
You can, and certainly the body does respond to those signals in the morning. I mean, I don't think, for most people, there's an excuse for looking at a red light rather than just looking at the sun, for example. So I think that you could just easily see the sunrise, maybe use your red light as the sunset. But I think if you're using a red light as a substitute for the sun, why is that? I think unless you were in an old people's home or something where you had no access to go outside, but most people can just, at least, even if you're in an apartment, stick your head out the window and kind of, because your body is totally cued up to all kinds of signals that we're getting from seeing the sun and the sky. So I very much advocate in training your circadian biology, but maybe kind of using your ambient environment for that, and using these red light devices for specific reasons and to top up that exposure. And it's really only through your eyes that you're getting that signal, the circadian signal.
Yeah, that's exactly why I shifted from going running in the evenings to going running in the mornings. So I get the sunlight, I get like just stacking the benefits.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Maximize the effect that you're getting. Yeah, if you're doing your running, I mean, we've spoken about this before. You're a super runner and I'm just starting off. But I do that too. I get up and I do my, well, not a run, but my kind of half-hearted jog around the golf course here. But I am doing it and I'm kind of looking at the sun, and I am kind of like using that as the start to my day with regards to my light exposure.
It does help. And once you get used to going up and running in the morning, it's really lovely to just see the sunrise. I mean, before that, years and years when I just went to, when I still worked at university, I kind of never really paid attention to the sunrise. And sometimes you can have years and think like, when was the last time I actually saw a sunrise?
Yeah.
And paid attention to it. And when you go running and you just see the sun come up over the hills, it's just so beautiful.
It's about, like you say, it's something that maybe you don't think about before. And once you tune into it, it becomes something, at the start of your day, however bad your day is going to get after that, you started it off well, so. Yeah. I agree, although it can be brutal here where we are in the Northern Hemisphere, because in the winter, there's nothing till 9 o'clock. You kind of either have to stagger your day or you're walking around in the dark for an hour, or and then in the summer, it can be very early. But I think as much as possible, I think as humans, we would all be a little bit better if we tried to stagger our day a little bit more in line with nature and what's going on in our ambient environment.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, what are some common maybe misconceptions about red light therapy, and how can listeners ensure that they are getting the right information?
Yes, I think probably one of the most common questions I get asked is it the same as infrared sauna? Because people hear the word infrared, and people are used to maybe in a lot of Europe, people are more used to saunas than they are to light therapy. So just to clear that one up, what you're doing with these devices, it's a photonic effect. And by that, I mean, it's a light effect. Actually, like you are using those particles of light. I'm kind of doing the brackets for anyone who's just listening because, we all know it's a wave and a particle, but you're using just a particle of light and having an effect on your biology. When you're using a sauna, you're using heat energy. So you're activating a different pathway in the body. Some people have got brilliant saunas where they have both. They have specific wavelengths of light and they have heat generated by infrared light. But we're talking about less than, say, 1200 nanometer wavelength, which is going to be a little bit warm, but the heat is not the effect that you're getting. So it is very different biologically to an infrared sauna.
Right. So the ideal would be to have a sauna with infrared light panel. Yeah. So you get the whole body exposure to red light.
That's right. And some saunas do it. I've got a sauna called Sauna Space, which is great. It's got an incandescent bulb. And so that's using that to heat the sauna. There are different ways you can do it. But I think, again, is what depends what you're trying to do. For something like the brain, you do need these specific wavelengths of light that's going to penetrate the skull, and you do need the light right up against your skin. The ambient light that you're going to get from a near infrared sauna, it's not going to do the same job. But yes, you can take your red light devices into the sauna potentially. If you've got ones that enable you to do that, and you can definitely stack your hacks that way. But it is different to sauna. So I think that's one of the common misconceptions about light therapy. And also then the different color reds, that's a bit of a misconception because there's red light and red light. You can buy any red light. You can use a red light that goes in the back of a car indicator or something. But you need to have a red light that's in the wavelength that is biologically active. And we... At the moment, the main theory about how red light works, and this is talking about how there's always a room for other data to come in, but what we know at the moment is that there are specific windows of light where we know that the light is being received by certain molecules. So the main molecule that receives light in the body that we know of at the moment is called cytochrome C oxidase, and that has a very specific absorption peak. So you do need to use light that's within those wavelengths. And as I've said, it's usually 630, 650, 850, 830. Anything else in the middle of them is either not being absorbed by that chromophore, or there are other things in the body that are absorbing the light as well, so you're not getting the effect.
Yeah. So are you aware of any other ongoing research or developments in this field that people should be aware of?
In light therapy?
Yes.
I mean, there's all kinds of interesting applications. I mean, I think people are still using the same mechanism, but there are interesting applications for things like there's a study going on in Harvard looking at Down syndrome and cognitive impairments with Down syndrome, looking at Asperger's syndrome and like kind of the cognitive challenges there. So that's very interesting. From a scientific point of view, people are starting to bring in this quantum biology piece, which to me is super interesting because, of course, you know, we do need to consider, we're talking about physics now. If we're talking about light, it's a physical phenomenon, you know. So, of course, quantum physics is going to play a part. And already, you know, the quantum physicists are way along there when they're talking about light and photons and entanglement and all of that cool stuff. Why isn't it happening in biology? Well, of course, it is happening in biology. It's just difficult for us to measure because quantum phenomenon, you know, historically, you know, it needs to be done in an environment which can be very carefully controlled. Otherwise, it's very difficult to measure. And the brain isn't an environment like that. You know, the brain is not easy to control. But there are people who are starting to look at that. And there are some very, very intelligent people now who are looking at making analogues of structures in the brain and then seeing how they respond on a quantum aspect to things like light. So, you know, there's Anubhav Bandyapati in India. He's doing fabulous work, but it's kind of so far above how most people can get their head around, because quantum physics really is very difficult. Yeah. It kind of goes against, you know, it's not the world we live in. It's just not the world we live in. But then also things like water. Again, water is so fascinating to me. And our bodies are water. Our bodies are some incredible, like 99 or 98% water by molecular weight. I mean, we really are water beings. And light has a very profound effect on water. Water will totally and utterly change its structure when it's next to like well, they call it a hydrophilic surface. It just means a water-loving surface, like a membrane in the body. And so all of a sudden you get this science that's looking at the effect of changing the water around proteins, changing the water around DNA, for example. And that actually has a structural effect, because the way that proteins and things fold in the body is very much determined by the hydrogen bonds and the bonding on the surface. If you change the structure of the water, you potentially change the function of the whole protein. So there are people doing some very incredible research at the moment looking at that more physics aspect of water. We just need the time to kind of transcribe that into biology.
That's so interesting.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating. And I go to some of these events and some of it's way above my head, but you can kind of get a vibe of what they're doing and how potentially that could have a big impact. And I think the water piece is something that really will start to be integrated fairly soon into our understanding of biology. And that will totally change the game for how we adapt some of these light therapy devices.
So interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So last but not least, where can our listeners find out more about you and your product?
Sure. So the product is called the Cera system. And that may be a bit egotistical, but it's actually spelled CERA, Cera. And the reason for that is, you know, I went through every different kind of synonym for light, lux and helios and all of these things, which of course were all taken. So in the end, we decided on the Cera system. It's a bit of a play on like cerebellum or cerebral because it's a brain device. So the website is called CeraThrive.com. The system is the Cera system. So people can go straight to the website. And we're actually taking pre-orders right now for delivery in May. So we've got a code for your listeners, which is HABITS10, all capital letters, and people can go on and use your code and get 10% off of the kind of early adopter price.
Perfect.
And then, as you said, I do a weekly podcast called Rebel Scientist, and I'm so glad that you're going to be a guest on the Rebel Scientist soon. So that'll be a reason for people to tune in. But that's just rebelscientist.com, and we're on everywhere that you can find podcasts.
Perfect. Sarah, again, thank you so much for sharing all those tips and insights with us today. It sounds like you're doing some amazing research, and I'd like to thank you just for having the courage to translate your research into a product that can so positively impact so many lives. So keep up the great work.
Thank you so much, Claudia. It was really great to be on here today. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care and
Bye-bye.
talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Wired for Success podcast. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. That's a fantastic, easy, and zero-cost way to help the show grow. Just use the link in the show notes and make my day. If you'd like to take it one step further, you can now join my inner circle and become an official supporter of the Wired for Success podcast. Supporting the show is super simple and will only take about 30 seconds. Basically, it works like any other paid subscription. All you have to do is to go to glow.fm/wiredforsuccess podcast, pay $5 per month or as much or as little as you like, and choose the link of the podcast player you want to use. You can listen anywhere in any app. So for less than the price of 1 to 2 fancy coffees per month, you can really make a difference and help me keep this show awesome. For more tips and info, check out my website at wiredforsuccess.solutions. Thanks a ton and talk to you soon.